My period started, and boom, all the pain was back. It was like the bone marrow was on fire.
She would scream out in pain. Tears would roll down her face.
My first thought was, if they don't get to me in time, that could kill me.
Good days were just slipping away until there weren't any.
I didn't know whether it was, could be fatal or not.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. Holly Pushevsky's doctor suspects she may be infertile and can't tell her why. But when harrowing leg pain suddenly set in during her period, she begins to wonder if there could be a link.
I was just so frustrated. It didn't feel like the doctors were listening to me.
There was something seriously wrong.
We didn't have any answers. And I thought, are my hopes of having a child really hopeless?
Then, Carly Eichhout's seemingly perfect life is turned completely upside down by a series of debilitating and potentially life-threatening attacks.
The last thing I remember was the stars, the bright stars going in my vision field, and then the blackness.
Summer of 2004, 29-year-old Holly Elkins and her boyfriend, Mike Pushevsky, had just eloped and were eagerly looking forward to starting their new life together.
Mike just had this great sense of humor, and I just felt like he really got me.
She was funny, very smart, obviously very beautiful. It felt real easy to be around her.
Mike and I moved to Missouri at the end of August, just after we got married.
When we first moved here, I took a sales position at a resort.
I worked for a dance theater company in Branson. We had family in the area. My sister has a little girl, and spending time with my niece really gave me that extra push that I was really ready to start a family.
In 1999, newlyweds Carly and Nathan Eichout were busy starting their lives together in Phoenix, Arizona. As a customer service rep and contractor, the couple worked long hours to make ends meet, but still managed to find time for each other.
We would take the dogs for hikes up the mountains around here, hang out by the pool, go out, have drinks, comedy clubs.
It was romantic and fun at the same time.
And for the 42-year-old Mike, there's an even greater sense of urgency.
I didn't want to be 60 years old and playing with the 5-year-old out in the backyard.
I didn't have any health issues. I was feeling great. I never thought that I would have any issue at all getting pregnant.
But a few months after the newlyweds decide to start their family, Holly notices a strange pain in her right leg.
It was just a deep ache.
It was kind of a vague pain, more like soreness. It really didn't seem like anything more than a pull or a strain.
Life is seemingly perfect, until one morning when Carly is caught off guard by a strange sensation.
I started feeling very nauseous, like I'm gonna throw up. Just kind of stood there trying to breathe really deeply and get through it. I think my first thought, being a female, was, am I pregnant? Because it happened in the morning.
Excited about the possibility, Carly picks up a home pregnancy test.
And I remember the hardest part was waiting. And I just wanted to know right away, and I wanted it to be positive. So I was disappointed when it was negative.
After a few days, the pain goes away, only to return several weeks later. It's the beginning of an odd pattern. Every few weeks, Holly gets a dull ache in her leg that subsides within about 4 days.
There was so much more on my mind, so I just kind of pushed the pain in my leg to the side and didn't pay attention to it.
Instead, Holly remains focused on getting pregnant. But 6 months later, the couple is still trying.
We never thought it would be that difficult to have a child. The OBGYN suggested that we chart her ovulation so we could find the optimum time to try to conceive.
Carly doesn't mention any of this to her husband, but over the next few weeks, she continues to wake up feeling nauseous, and eventually Nathan begins to suspect that something is up.
It seemed like she wasn't being her full self at that time.
And so we started doing ovulation tests. We started charting my cycle, but things weren't going our way. It started to get difficult, and then it started to get really heartbreaking.
We went to see Holly's OBGYN regarding the problem. She did a sperm analysis for me, and that came back fine.
It meant that the burden, I guess, was shifted to me. I felt like I was broken.
Then, when an agonizing new symptom suddenly emerges at work, Carly can no longer deny that something is very wrong.
I was sitting at my desk and I just felt like a spasm in my abdomen that kind of jolted me. It kept coming back like a couple minutes apart, where it was just like this spasming, cramping pain.
I definitely knew that something was going on. She was clutching her desk.
I decided that I had to try something else. It wasn't working. We discussed our options as far as fertility treatments. We decided to go ahead with a fertility medication that we would try for 3 months. If that didn't work, then we would probably go forward with the in vitro fertilization.
She started a fertility drug that would help her ovaries produce eggs. We both were holding out that this would help us.
Carly finally relents and decides to see a gastroenterologist. He performs a thorough exam and quickly comes to a diagnosis.
My doctor immediately felt that I probably had acid reflux disease, which can cause nausea and it can cause abdominal pain. And so he figured he'd start me on a prescription for that, and I thought, I'll try this prescription and we'll see where it leads us.
In addition to medication, the doctor advises Carly to keep her stress in check, as it can trigger bouts of acid reflux. He also asks her to change her diet. Her first cycle of medication, Holly notices something unusual.
The pain in my leg increased. There was like this deep pain in my buttock and my hip at the same time. It was like the bone marrow was on fire, and it started to feel like my femur was ripping through my butt muscles. I knew I had to see a doctor right away. I told the OBGYN that I was having pain when I started taking the fertility medication, and she said that endometriosis could cause pain like this and cause infertility. So I thought, great, we've got the answer to both problems.
Endometriosis is a condition in which tissue that normally lines the uterus grows in other areas of the body, usually the fallopian tubes or ovaries. It can cause both pain and infertility.
No fried, fatty foods, spicy foods, acid foods, things like that that would trigger it. Caffeine, alcohol. I did eliminate from my diet to try to help myself.
She was the one person on the team who you could put a plate of food or a donut in front of her and she wouldn't touch it because it just didn't make her well.
She'd suggested that Holly have a pelvic laparoscopy done as a diagnostic sort of surgery.
3 weeks later, Holly is wheeled into the OR for the procedure.
While they were doing the surgery, I think every possible thought ran through my brain. I didn't know what they were going to find when they went in there.
Carly diligently follows the doctor's orders, but all to no avail. Each day, she struggles to manage seemingly random bouts of nausea and excruciating abdominal pains that seem to come and go at will.
I would drive around with a bowl or something that I could throw up in, and I would have that with me all the time.
Still, Carly manages to keep it together as best she can, until one day at work when everything changes. The results of the exploratory surgery stun everyone.
The OBGYN said she didn't find any endometriosis at all. Everything looked fine.
We didn't have any answers. We didn't know what was causing the pain. We didn't know why I couldn't get pregnant. And I thought, are my hopes of having a child really hopeless?
I was feeling pain. I was sweating. I was having hot flashes. I was feeling incredibly nauseous. I had a garbage bag right there ready to go because I felt I needed to throw up. The last thing I remember was the stars, the bright stars going in my vision field, and then the blackness.
On top of that, after undergoing exploratory surgery for endometriosis, Holly's uterus appears to be perfectly healthy.
The doctor didn't know what the answer was.
It was extremely frustrating.
Puzzled, the doctor takes Holly off the fertility pills in hopes that the pain will eventually subside.
I couldn't do the medication anymore. It was just increasing the pain far too much in my leg.
She was nervous, just in so much pain. You could just see the pain in her face. And because she's such an even-keeled person, to see her like that was really tough.
Sue and a few other colleagues put Carly into a car and rush her to the closest emergency room. On the way there, she regains consciousness and asks if someone can contact Nathan, who's out of town on business.
Some of her teammates went and called Nathan to try and get a hold of him.
I just couldn't believe that it was going on, really.
But I was still keeping the ovulation charts. There was definitely still a part of me that hadn't given up hope that I was going to be able to have a child on my own.
Nathan was like 150 miles away, and he couldn't be there for her.
Within minutes of her arrival at the ER, Carly explains the bizarre series of attacks to the on-call doctor. He immediately performs an ultrasound and discovers abnormal amounts of fluid floating freely in Carly's abdomen.
My first thought was my appendix has ruptured, and if they don't get to me in time, that could kill me.
But nothing could have prepared Carly for the doctor's diagnosis.
But despite cycling off the medication, the excruciating bouts of pain only intensify.
Both the severity and the duration of it increased. It was the worst pain that I had experienced to this point. The real focal point of where it felt like the pain was radiating from was in the very center, deep, deep in my right buttock.
She would scream out in pain. Tears would roll down her face.
He's confident that she's suffering from a ruptured ovarian cyst.
That kind of came out of left field for me. I hadn't really thought of my problems being related to any type of female reproductive issue.
Ovarian cysts are small fluid-filled sacs that commonly form in the ovaries and usually go away on their own. But in some cases, they can spontaneously rupture, causing severe pain. The doctor gives her a prescription for a round of antibiotics and recommends that she follow up with her gynecologist immediately.
I was really worried for her, because I didn't understand really what was going on.
2 days later, Carly meets with her gynecologist, who is very concerned about the constellation of symptoms: chronic nausea, excruciating abdominal pain, and now the ruptured cysts.
I started having trouble walking in that I wasn't really able to weight bear very much onto my right leg.
With no idea as to what's causing the painful episodes, Holly's doctor refers her to a physical therapist.
And after the first couple of weeks, I thought, this is really working. I'm feeling better.
Holly was walking better. Obviously, she was feeling better because she was in a much better mood.
It was like I was back to my normal self again.
She's concerned that something serious is going on and recommends that they perform exploratory laparoscopic surgery right away.
That was a major surgery to me, so I was very, very nervous. I just needed to be brave.
3 hours later in the OR, the surgical team confirms that Carly did indeed experience a ruptured ovarian cyst, and that she is in fact suffering from endometriosis, a condition which occurs when tissue inside the uterus grows into the pelvic cavity.
I was just shocked, more shocked than anything else.
But just when Holly thinks she's out of the woods for good, the attacks return with a vengeance.
My period started, and boom, all the pain was back. On a scale of 1 to 10, this was a 15.
And we just took a giant step backwards. I thought it was very weird.
The surgeon successfully removes the endometrial tissue, but he explains that the condition could return at any moment. And most concerning to Carly is a very real ramification of endometriosis: infertility.
It's shocking to hear a doctor sit there and tell you you might not be able to be pregnant.
Once I heard that, I was a little bit upset, but I probably didn't show it as much as I really was feeling at the time.
For Carly to not have children was just devastating to her.
And as bad as it is, it's an answer, and that's what I wanted, and now we can take steps forward to correcting it.
I went back to the physical therapist, and I told her about how the pain had started again right when my menstrual cycle had started. And the physical therapist kind of stepped back, and she said, "I can't treat you." She was afraid that she was going to do something that was going to cause more harm than it was going to help, because she didn't know why the pain was back.
The doctor promises Carly that the surgery should begin to alleviate her nausea and abdominal pain. Over the next month, she patiently waits for the symptoms to subside. But it soon becomes clear that nothing has changed.
I got back into my normal routine of feeling nauseous most of the time and having this pain come in and out of my life whenever it felt like it. I was very disappointed and wondering, why me?
Now, Holly is convinced the pain is in some way connected to her menstrual cycle.
And the week before my period, I would be totally pain-free. And as soon as my period started, the pain would shoot through the roof.
We thought that there was something seriously wrong, and in some sort of bizarre way, it was tied to her menstrual cycle.
We met with the OBGYN. It was like, well, maybe this is it, maybe it's not. Because she hadn't figured it out, it was like it really wasn't even a possibility.
Carly and Nathan do their best to move on with their lives. But over the next few months, Carly's health takes a nosedive. In addition to the unrelenting nausea and abdominal pain, a new and embarrassing symptom sets in.
Unpersuaded by Holly's hypothesis, but without one of her own, all the doctor can do is prescribe medication for the pain.
I was prescribed narcotic-level painkillers and a muscle relaxer. It was basically just a way to try to manage the pain, but we didn't have any answers.
It really seemed like the doctors were too eager to throw up their hands and say, "I don't know, here's a prescription for the pain."
I felt these urgencies to go to the bathroom, and I would try to go to the bathroom, and I would either have really loose stool or nothing, and that urgency would come and go just like the pain would come and go, and it would catch me at the worst of times. I would be shopping, and all of a sudden I'm leaving my cart in the middle of the aisle and running to find a bathroom.
Undeterred, Holly visits several doctors over the next few months and walks them through her theory of a menstrual cycle link. But no one is buying it.
I was just so frustrated. It didn't feel like the doctors were listening to me.
We really felt like her pain was cycling with her periods. We just didn't know why or how.
Carly is at her wit's end, but her frustration quickly turns to fear when she makes an alarming discovery.
I had a bowel movement at home and looked in the toilet, and there was blood. I was terrified, and it made me wonder if there was some type of internal bleeding happening.
And with each new episode, the pain seems to be growing more debilitating.
It was getting progressively worse every month.
The intensity of the pain increased and the duration of the pain increased. I would have about 1 to 1.5 good weeks out of the month. The rest of the time, I was in pretty severe pain.
She couldn't bear weight on that leg. It was very painful for me to watch her have to go through that.
In a state of panic, Carly races to see her gastroenterologist. Concerned, he orders a battery of tests in an effort to pinpoint the source of the bleeding.
Within 1 week, I was at this hospital every day for a different test.
For the first time in a year, Carly begins to feel as if they're finally zeroing in on an explanation. But nothing could have prepared her for the doctor's final verdict.
The doctor said, everything's normal and you need to deal with your problems. I was losing hope that I wasn't gonna find out what was going on and that I'm just gonna look like this crazy person trying to find out.
I wouldn't say right to her face, but on other conversations with other people where I'd call her a hypochondriac.
Walking is now a struggle, and it isn't long before Holly notices the strength in her right leg beginning to wane.
I started having to use a cane to get around. It got to the point that the pain was too much. The cane didn't even help me walk. I couldn't walk at all. I was crawling on the floor. I was pathetic. The good days were just slipping away until there weren't any. Mike had to take care of pretty much everything for me, and I was scared that there was gonna come a time that he was gonna say, I can't do this anymore. It's too much of a burden and I can't carry it. And I had no idea where that was gonna leave me because I couldn't take care of myself.
Ashamed, Carly does her best to hide her condition and move on with her life.
So I went into my own little world and didn't share a whole lot with him for that reason.
It felt like it wasn't even the same person that I knew 4 or 5 years ago. It was tough.
Over the next 4 years, Carly continues to check in with a variety of specialists: gastroenterologists, gynecologists, holistic doctors, and psychiatrists. And each and every time, she hears the same thing. They attribute her symptoms to acid reflux and endometriosis.
I always heard the same thing from the doctors, that my stress and other things were triggering the exasperation of these conditions and that I need to learn how to manage the stress. It would make me furious.
Desperate for answers, Holly makes an appointment with a doctor who specializes in physiatry, or the rehabilitation of movement.
He did an exam to see what my range of motion was, and he decided that we needed to do an MRI of my hip.
We were hoping that it would show something that would give us some sort of idea what was causing the pain.
4 days later, the doctor calls her back. But little does Holly know, her entire world is about to be turned upside down.
It was kind of odd for him to be calling me himself, and I could tell that his voice was shaken. Something was wrong. He said that there was a mass on my sciatic nerve. And he kept talking, but all I heard was a mass, a mass, a mass. The doctor had never seen anything like this before.
It seems to Carly as if no one can grasp the severity of her situation, including the person she counts on most, her husband.
I definitely started to feel Nathan and I drifting apart. We were physically together, but emotionally we weren't talking about anything at all, really. And I was pretty much feeling bad all the time, not feeling like doing anything.
Wasn't too sure at the time what was going on, whether she was sick or just wanted to be alone by herself or what.
It was very hard. I felt very alone. I didn't want to see us fall apart at all. I just didn't know what to do.
He said it's blood-filled, it's bleeding. It's about the size of a ping pong ball.
The doctor is mystified, but he does agree there may be something to Holly's theory of a menstrual cycle link. That same day, he refers her to a specialist, Dr. James Schreiber, head of the OBGYN department at Washington University in St. Louis.
Whatever this mass was in her leg, was pressing on the major nerve of the leg, which is sciatic nerve. The vast majority of the muscles of the leg are controlled by the sciatic nerve.
Carly's sudden deterioration is a wake-up call for Nathan, who has never truly realized the severity of his wife's bizarre condition.
I was definitely worried about her.
He was consoling me. He'd be there holding my hair, rubbing my back. He very much started trying to be that person I wanted him always to be.
Over and over, Nathan begs Carly to go back to the doctor.
Because I thought it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and they're just going to tell me the same thing. They're going to run some blood work, they're going to do a few exams, and then they're going to give me a prescription and they're going to send me home. So I was trying just to deal with it.
But Dr. Schreiber won't be able to determine what the mass is or how to treat it until a pathologist examines it.
Dr. Schreiber said I had to have surgery and I had to have it right away. The purpose of the surgery was to remove the mass that had built up and matted down the sciatic nerve.
Then, in May 2007, Carly's pain and vomiting becomes so bad that she's unable to eat or drink for several days. Finally, she breaks down and calls Nathan, who's out of town on business.
She called me and told me that she was on the floor in pain, and I told her to call an ambulance to go to the emergency room.
15 minutes later, paramedics arrive and race her to the hospital. Emergency room doctor Curtis Henderson takes over the case.
I was working in the emergency room. Carly had come in as a patient complaining of abdominal pain. With abdominal pain like that, you have to think of things like gallbladder problems. You have to think of intestinal issues, large and small intestine. You even have to be concerned a little about their lung or about their heart. We gave her some IV fluids, and we started blood work to see if anything in her body would manifest itself as abnormalities in blood work.
The surgery offered hope, but it also offered risk and even danger.
If something went wrong with the sciatic nerve, then I would be paralyzed.
While Carly anxiously awaits the results of the blood tests, Nathan drives as fast as he can to the hospital.
I was worried, really, really bad. I didn't know whether it was, could be fatal or not. I was definitely worried.
He was very much trying to be my sounding board and trying to be calm.
An hour later, Carly's blood work results come back, and to everyone's shock, they are perfectly normal. Perplexed, Dr. Henderson orders an abdominal x-ray and ultrasound, and the results are again surprising.
The basic x-rays and ultrasounds were all normal. So because of that persistent pain, I decided to get a CAT scan of her abdomen to see what it would reveal. It was really a mystery.
2 hours later, Dr. Henderson receives the CAT scan report, and this time, it's a bombshell. After so many misdirections, a quick glance is all it takes to pinpoint what's been plaguing Carly all these years.
Based on a CAT scan, I knew Carly had intussusception.
Intussusception is a rare condition where the small intestine telescopes into the large intestine. Normally, the two sections of intestine remain separate, but in patients like Carly, they become intertwined. This telescoping eventually obstructs blood flow to the small intestine, slowing down digestion and causing bleeding. If not treated, the bowel can become gangrenous, and in the worst cases, lead to death.
In very simple terms, if you think of a pirate's spy scope and how it telescopes in and out, the small intestine folds into the large intestine, and what can happen, the large intestine can actually cut off the blood supply to the small intestine. It makes people vomit, and it causes a lot of pain.
It sounds kind of weird. I was happy. I was so happy that I'm not crazy. And I remember even saying that to Nathan, saying, I told you so. I told you something was wrong.
I told Dr. Schreiber that I would be okay with the surgery, but I had to have him there with me.
Finally, on a cool May morning, the doctor takes Holly in for surgery at Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis.
He really seemed to have a good game plan, so that on one hand kind of put me at ease, but also on the other hand, I was scared to death.
I was okay until they put me on the gurney, and part of me thought, I'm gonna die.
As it turns out, Carly's endometriosis was just a coincidence and didn't have anything to do with the intussusception.
Intussusception is truly an emergency. I've only seen intussusception 2 other times in adults. It's much more common in infants. When tissue in the body does not get adequate blood supply, the tissue disintegrates. It gets infected, and that infection can go throughout the entire body and cause death.
A million thoughts ran through my brain. What happens if something goes wrong? Is everything going to be right?
The idea of the surgery is to remove the majority of the mass so that this won't all form again and to relieve the pressure on the nerve. Once the mass was removed, all of the tissue was sent to pathology, and then they looked under the microscope. But in the midst of this mass, they saw normal endometrial cells. Based on the analysis of the tissue that was removed at the time of surgery, Ms. Bashevsky was diagnosed with sciatic endometriosis.
I was just kind of in shock.
With no time to waste, Dr. Henderson explains that before they can treat her condition, they have to find out what's causing her intestines to telescope in the first place, and the possibilities are terrifying.
There was some thought that there was a tumor involved. A tumor in that area can cause intussusception.
It's imperative that Dr. Henderson get a close look at her intestines. He immediately schedules surgery. Carly can barely process it all.
I did get nervous, and so I was very much, doing some praying and telling myself positive thoughts.
At 6 o'clock the next morning, the medical team rolls Carly into the OR. As Nathan kisses his wife goodbye, he struggles to keep his emotions in check.
I was nervous, anxious, anxiety, just everything just wrapped up, and just so many things kind of going through my head. What if, what if?
Sciatic endometriosis is an extremely rare disease that affects the sciatic nerve. When a healthy woman menstruates, the cells that make up the uterine lining are shed and blood flows out of the body. But in women with sciatic endometriosis, for some unknown reason, cells that line the uterus migrate to the sciatic nerve. As a result, blood is trapped in random areas along the nerve, triggering inflammation and ultimately leading to the buildup of scar tissue, which compresses the sciatic nerve.
One would presume that there is an event. Some cells from the uterus somehow get into the bloodstream and then travel to that area.
This may only be a one-time event, but once the initial cells migrate from the uterus to the sciatic nerve, they simultaneously bleed each month when Holly has her period.
So every time I had a period, I was having a menstrual cycle in my leg. I thought that was crazy.
Inside the operating room, the medical team begins the delicate surgery.
The surgeon made a cut just above the belly button and went in to evaluate the bowel.
First, they painstakingly examine every inch of Carly's intestines, looking for any form of obstruction. It's an intense process that takes more than 4 hours. Eventually, the surgeons do identify a single growth. They then correct her telescoping intestines and remove the tumor, which is immediately sent to the lab for evaluation.
Then in the second half of the cycle after ovulation, you have the uterine lining getting ready for pregnancy. When pregnancy does not occur, the surface of it sloughs off, and you get bleeding from the vessels associated with it. This entire sequence also occurs wherever endometrial tissue is, and in this case, it happened to be in the leg. It's different than in the uterus where you have an exit. Here it's trapped in the leg tissue, and then the bleeding causes enormous tissue reaction around it. That would then trigger stimulation of the pain nerves in the sciatic. We don't know how long it's been in Ms. Bashevsky's leg. Why it happened then and not earlier, I have no idea.
But with a diagnosis finally in hand, it's now clear that all of Holly's symptoms are a direct result of the disease.
I was definitely worried it could be cancer.
5 hours later, the findings are in. The tumor is benign.
The cyclic pain that Ms. Bashevsky noted in the beginning of this whole process probably was a direct reaction of the blood The bleeding from this is really microscopic, but it sets off this whole cascade of inflammatory responses, one of which is pain.
And the pain was only exacerbated by the endometriosis, which took off with a vengeance when she started taking the fertility medication.
The medicines that she received to stimulate the ovulation would also cause her estrogen to go higher than it would in a normal menstrual cycle. Estrogen causes endometrial cells to divide, and so it is gasoline to the fire.
And with each passing month, more blood and tissue became trapped, eventually forming large swaths of scar tissue.
The scar tissue was matting everything down, compressing the nerve, squeezing it.
The difficulty with walking is a result of compression of the motor nerves. You prevent the motor nerves from working. Without the nerves, the muscles don't work, and you have difficulty walking.
Every one of the symptoms made sense. It really seemed so simple.
Very happy news. We were both just like holding each other, so happy.
And while Carly and Nathan are thrilled to finally be out of the woods, they can't help but wonder why it took so many years to get a solid diagnosis.
A person can have transient symptoms, but no one can find out the problem because it goes away. In this kind of intussusception, you can actually have a sliding in and out of the small intestine into the large intestine. And in Carly's case, it's very possible that it just got stuck this time, and we were able to catch it.
After 9 days of recovery, Dr. Henderson releases Carly from the hospital. And for the first time in years, she finally feels like her old self again. But the one thing the couple is desperate to know more than anything else remains a mystery. Will Holly ever be able to conceive?
After the surgery, we both still had this big question mark hanging over. Why can't we have a child?
I was eating, I was drinking, I was happy again.
She just seemed like a whole different person. She wasn't nauseous anymore after that. It wasn't the same old Carly that I knew, but it was just a new Carly, a better Carly.
And just when she thinks it can't get any better, Carly is thrown for another loop. 2 months after the surgery, she's shocked and elated to discover that she's pregnant.
I was so happy, and we were both crying. We were just over the moon about it.
Endometriosis is related to infertility, but cytic endometriosis, I can think of no reason why that in and of itself should cause infertility.
I thought if I had endometriosis, that would be the answer to my infertility. And now, that wasn't the answer.
But while doctors are unsure why Holly is infertile, the sad truth is she will never be able to get pregnant.
It is a form of birth control, so it would be very tough for her to become pregnant because it should suppress ovulation. It is possible that she'll be on this until menopause.
Emotionally, it's still hard because the way that we treat the disease now is through hormone manipulation. I wanted to have a baby, and if I don't want this to come back, then that's really not an option.
We probably aren't ever going to have children of our own, so we're strongly considering adopting a child.
Today, Carly is healthy and focuses on spending time with her husband and raising their son.
Life is good. Like, life couldn't be any better right now. We've got a beautiful baby boy.
We are much stronger now. Having been through all that, we're absolutely happy again with each other and committed to making a good life for our son. So I couldn't be any happier now. I feel normal again.